Welcome to part 2 of our Pictorial whole cloth quilt tutorial. Before we begin to mark our fabric, let's talk a little bit about markers.
There's different types of markers that you can use. The standard in the industry for years since I've been sewing have been the blue water-soluble markers. I've got 3 different types of markers here. Here's a marker here that is made by Clover. It's a fine marker. It says right on the back, test marker on the fabric before use. You might want to try that if that's the kind of marker you're using. Here's the Mark Be Gone, which is also something that's been on the market a long time. No warning on this one. Here's another water erasable marker by Clover. Same as the first one I showed you, except this was a fine line and this is a thick. So let's test these out.
First up are our Clover markers. We have the fine, which has the white cap. And let's test that out. Let's zoom in a little bit so you can really see this. And there's your fine line. You should not have any trouble seeing that, but if you like something a little bit thicker, a little bit easier for your senior eyes to see, you can use the thick marker, also by Clover. The third marker that we're going to use is the Mark Be Gone, and it has a medium-sized point. Now I'm using a very wet paper towel and just dabbing at the marks. And I think you can see that it did a good job of removing all the marks. So I would call this one a safe one to use.
The markers that I've been using lately have been the Friction markers. There's a lot of controversy on these markers because these ones that I just showed you are made for fabric. The Friction markers, however, were not. It was purely by accident that somebody tried these markers out and found out that, hey, I could use this to mark fabric. So you can get a typical marker like this. They're made by Pilot, and they were designed to be erasable markers. So when you're writing on something, if you make a mistake with the ink, you can just erase it. These are readily available at office supply stores. I get them in a 12-pack from my ever-famous Amazon store. These markers actually come down to less than $1 a piece. This marker was $5.95. I prefer these ones mainly because of the cost, but let's try them both out. Excuse me. So here's the regular Friction marker. Here is the marker that I get through Amazon. You can see that this marker makes a thicker line versus this one, which is a fine line. Now, this one you do not remove with water like we did the first. This one we remove with the steam of the iron. We're just going to hover the iron over the mark. And the marks are gone.
Another marker that some people have used successfully are the Crayola washable crayons. This is a marker you want to avoid though. This is an air erasable marker, and unless you are planning on stitching your project up really quick, your marks will disappear before you want them to. Okay, we've decided on our markers. Now we're ready to prepare our fabric for transfer. Your fabric should be approximately 44 inches square. I would press it well. A little starch works really well because what we're going to do is fold it in quarters and not press it with an iron, but just finger press it. And that's going to be our guidelines as we start to do the placement. Now as we open this up, you'll see that because of the starch that we put in here, when we did the finger pressing, those lines come out really well. It's not a hard ironed in crease, but it's a crease that will be very visible for our placement.
Okay, if you recall, after our last session, the last thing I said was stop, don't go any further. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that we still have these black dots and registration marks on all four corners of our drawing. That's going to help us place it squarely in the middle of our whole cloth. That's another reason why we folded our fabric the way we did. Now, I've already gone ahead and measured between these two dots from side to side, and they measure in at 19 inches. I've also measured between the bottom and top dot, and that measures at 24 inches. So we're going to use the center lines that we just folded into our whole cloth to determine where we're going to place this drawing so that it's centered. So half of 19 would be 9.5. Half of 24 would be 12. So we're going to use these measurements and mark our whole cloth. So we're going to go from the center, right here, we're going to measure up 12 inches along this line. So we've got the 12-inch mark here at the center line. We're going to mark up here. Again, before you start marking, make sure you haven't grabbed the wrong pen. Make sure you have a pen that is going to be erasable. And while you have the ruler there, if you're using your yardstick, such like I am, you can go ahead and mark the 24 inches. So now we have our height marked out. Now we need to mark our width, and that was 9.5 inches. So I'm going to put the 9.5 inch mark on the center line, mark here, come over here to 19 and make another mark. So now we've marked out our parameters of where this drawing is going to go, but we have to square it up first.
Here I'm using an OmniGrid 12-inch square up ruler. If you don't have one, that's not a problem. Use another ruler that's at least 12 inches long. You're going to put the 9.5 inch mark against your center crease. And you're going to continue to do that, sliding your ruler up and making your marks. If you're using a regular ruler and can't make long marks like I am with a square up, after you're done here, just draw a line connecting all your lines, and you'll be fine. Now let's change rulers. We're going to go from a square up to a longer ruler and connect the two center lines and make sure that we're keeping that mark that we originally put for the height that's in the center. Just connect all the dots and you'll be ready to go. You have your rectangle drawn. Do you see the circle that I've drawn at the intersection of the vertical and horizontal lines? Now you're going to see why I said don't trim away anything else off of your drawing, because that mark and the mark that you just had on the corners that you just drew are going to keep you squared up on your fabric. So put your drawing down first and lay your fabric over top of it. You probably can't see it through the magic of this camera, but you can very easily see the drawing underneath. And what you want to do is line up that intersection with the intersection on your drawing. And I think you can faintly see the drawing underneath. So you're going to get that side lined up. You're going to move over to the other side as you hold that in place and get it lined up. So now we're ready to get this anchored down so that we can start to mark our quilt. To ensure your drawing does not shift underneath your fabric while you're sketching it onto your cloth, simply pin at each corner and in other areas on your quilt to hold your drawing and your whole cloth together. Now that we have our design anchored to our whole cloth, we're ready to begin actually drawing out the design. Please join me in part 3 as we work on that and begin our trapunto effect in our whole cloth. It's been my pleasure to bring you this video lesson. Please join us on our Facebook group, Sit Down Free Motion Quilters, for complete pattern instructions, tips, and more. See you there.